The first thing she remembered was the crunch of dry gravel under hooves, the sound of betrayal. Dust swirled in the dying light as her brother rode away, a satchel heavier with silver and a heart lighter without shame. Evie stood there barefoot, the desert wind lifting the hem of her tattered dress, her hands instinctively pressed to the swell of her belly. The child kicked, alive, defiant, while everything else in her world was being sold off like rusted cattle. She didn't scream, didn't cry. Her throat had learned silence the same way her skin had learned cold, through relentless exposure. The sun dropped behind the ridge, casting a long shadow from the wagon that had brought her here, now empty of cargo. Just a girl not yet 18 traded for a stack of coins and a bottle of rotgut. The men who bought her didn't look twice when Jude called her dead weight. They laughed, already thinking about what came next. But Evie had already decided. She waited until the gamblers turned their backs, hands busy lighting cigars, chuckling about her youth like it was a special spice. Then she ran. Fast, fierce, fueled by something primal. Not hope, not yet. Just the raw terror of being touched by hands that didn't know tenderness. Her lungs burned. Her feet bled. The desert was unkind, but it was hers now, and she would take its cruelty over theirs. By the time the moon clawed its way into the sky, she was half a mile from camp, hidden beneath thornbrush and cedar. Her dress was torn. Her lip bled. But she was still free. For now. She pressed her back to the dirt and tried to breathe without sobbing. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes howled. One of them might have been her, if not for the human shape she carried like a curse. Her thoughts drifted as the stars blinked awake, back to childhood. She remembered her brother lifting her onto a horse, laughing as she shrieked in joy, her pigtails bouncing. That boy was gone now. War and whiskey had carved him into something cruel. Something that looked like a man but didn't act like one. The baby kicked again, reminding her to stay awake. The desert didn't care about sleeping girls. She pushed herself upright and moved, slow and deliberate, away from the campfire glow behind her. A wrong turn could mean death, but she'd take death over the fate that waited if she returned. She followed a dry creek bed north, dragging her skirt through sagebrush and ash. Her throat dried fast. Her breath got ragged. Every few steps she'd freeze, listen, then keep going. The night was filled with tiny threats, snakes, sharp rocks, memories. It was nearly dawn when her legs gave out. She collapsed near a cluster of scrub pine, her hands trembling, body spent. Her mouth tasted like dust and iron. Her eyes fluttered shut, too heavy to keep open. She didn't plan to sleep. But her body betrayed her like everyone else had. When she woke, the world was different. The sun was higher, casting dappled gold through early spring leaves. And standing not 10 feet away was a man. Tall. Worn-looking. A face shaded by a wide-brimmed hat and a beard like brambles. An axe rested on his shoulder like it belonged there. His shirt was threadbare but clean. His boots were old but strong. For a moment they just stared at each other. Neither moved. Then she saw his eyes, gray like river rock, watchful, unreadable. "Don't scream," he said. She didn't. Instead, she reached for a stone, her fingers curling weakly around it. Her body wouldn't follow through, but her pride held firm. The man didn't move. "If I meant you harm, you'd already be dead." She didn't argue. Her throat was too dry to form words anyway. He stepped forward slowly, squatting near her. He didn't touch her. Just studied her like a strange animal that might bite. "You need water," he said. She hated the sound of his voice, calm, almost bored, like this was just another Tuesday. She wanted to spit but had nothing left to give. He stood again and walked away. She thought he was leaving her, and for a moment, despair clenched her heart tight enough to make her gasp. But he came back. A metal flask in one hand. A strip of jerky in the other. He held them out. Evie took the flask first, hands shaking so hard she spilled half of it down her front. The water was cold. Clean. She drank like it was sacred. The man watched her but didn't speak. When she tried the jerky, she nearly gagged, but hunger overruled revulsion. She chewed it slow, jaw aching. Finally, she forced her voice into a whisper. "Who are you?" He didn't answer right away. "Name's Sawyer." "Why are you out here?" He glanced at the woods behind him. "Live nearby." "Alone?" He nodded. "By choice." Evie tried to stand, but her legs wobbled. Sawyer stepped forward, one hand out. She flinched. He stopped short. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said quietly. She looked up at him. "Everyone says that." "Fair enough." They stared again, two people who didn't trust anything but instinct. Hers told her not to trust a man with an axe. But it also told her he'd saved her. That he could have taken what he wanted and hadn't. That was worth something. Where's your people? He asked. Gone, she said. He nodded like he understood, and she wondered if he did. If he too had watched his family vanish one betrayal at a time. She didn't ask. She didn't care yet. Can you walk? She nodded, though she wasn't sure. He didn't offer to carry her. Just turned and started walking uphill toward a ridge. She followed, slowly, leaning on trees when her balance failed. It took half an hour to reach the edge of a clearing. That's when she saw the cabin. It was simple, wooden, one-story chimney spitting a thin thread of smoke into the morning sky. A fence encircled a few chickens. A dog barked once and then settled. The place looked sturdy. Honest. Like it belonged to someone who preferred trees over people. Sawyer pushed open the door and stood aside. You can rest here. I got extra blankets. Evie hesitated. The last door she stepped through had locked behind her. Why? She asked. He tilted his head. Why what? Why help me? He studied her again. His eyes narrowed, then softened just a little. Because I saw a girl in trouble, he said. And because I'd hope someone do the same for my sister, if I had one. She stepped inside. It smelled like pine and smoke and something baking, bread maybe. The room was sparse but warm. A fire crackled in a stone hearth. A rough-hewn table stood beside a rocking chair. One cot sat against the wall, neatly made. Another lay rolled up in the corner. You can use that one, Sawyer said, nodding to the spare bedroll. Water's on the stove. You can wash up if you want. She nodded but didn't speak. Too much kindness at once made her wary. He pulled off his coat, hung it by the door. She noticed the scars on his forearms. Not fresh. Not gentle. He saw her looking. Chopping trees ain't easy work. Evie didn't answer. She shuffled to the rolled bedding and sat, her back finally resting against something other than dirt. She almost cried again. Sawyer crouched near the fire, poked it with iron tongs. Rest, he said. She wanted to ask what he wanted in return. Wanted to brace herself for the cost. But her eyelids betrayed her again. The warmth and the silence and the exhaustion pulled her under. She woke hours later to the smell of stew. Her body ached less. Her belly shifted like a tide. Sawyer sat in the chair, carving something small from wood. He looked up. You snore, he said. She smiled before she could stop herself. He handed her a bowl, still steaming. She took it. Ate without comment. When she finished, she finally asked the question she'd been holding in. Can I stay? Sawyer didn't answer for a long time. Then he looked her straight in the eyes. Through the melt, he said. Winter's not over. And that baby's coming. Evie exhaled, her body finally relaxing. The fire popped. Outside, snow started falling again, soft as ash. And though neither of them said it, they both felt the shift, the quiet beginning of something neither asked for but neither refused. Snow fell lightly through the pines, softening the world outside into shades of gray and white. Inside the cabin, the air was warm but tense. Evie sat near the fire, her hands cradling a chipped mug filled with tea made from pine needles and dried herbs. Sawyer moved around the space with quiet efficiency, stacking wood near the hearth, checking the shutters, stirring the pot on the stove without saying much. They'd shared the same space for 2 days now, and though no harm had come to her, Evie remained watchful. Survival had taught her trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. She studied him in the flickering light. His shoulders were broad, but they sagged like he carried more than firewood. His face was carved from weather and war, the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile but still remembered how to listen. He'd said little since taking her in, and what little he had offered came in dry, even tones, neither cruel nor kind, just measured. Evie didn't know what to make of that. She didn't need kindness, not anymore. But she did need predictability. For now, Sawyer Boone seemed safe. On the third morning, she woke to the sound of an axe splitting wood. The rhythm was hypnotic, steady, deliberate like a heartbeat. She stepped outside wrapped in a blanket, boots too big on her feet. Sawyer was shirtless despite the chill, steam rising from his skin as he drove the axe down into a stump with a grunt. He noticed her watching but said nothing, just kept working. She didn't speak either. There was something oddly comforting in the silence between them, like an agreement had been struck without words. When he returned to the cabin, his chest glistening with sweat, he set the axe against the wall and looked at her. You plan on staying in that blanket forever? She raised an eyebrow. You offering a wardrobe? Got a trunk full of things left behind, he replied. Might find something that fits. Evie followed him to a small storage room, where he opened a cedar chest filled with old clothes. Flannel shirts, wool trousers, garments worn thin with time. She picked through them carefully, choosing a heavy coat and a faded red blouse that once belonged to someone smaller than her. When she emerged from the room, Sawyer looked her over, nodded once and went back to the stove. She helped chop vegetables for the evening stew, fingers stiff from inexperience. He showed her how to hold the knife, how to keep her fingers safe. His hands guided hers once, briefly, and she stiffened. He backed off without a word. Respect, she realized, was one thing he gave freely. Later, as the wind howled through the trees, she asked, "Why do you live out here alone?" Sawyer sat at the table, sharpening a blade with slow, steady strokes. "Some men get tired of people. That's not an answer." He looked at her, eyes the color of riverbed stone. "Saw too much. Did too much. Figured the trees didn't care what I used to be." She waited, but he didn't elaborate. "Soldier?" she asked. He nodded. "Blue or gray?" "Blue. Virginia mostly. Cold winters. Bad orders." Evie stared into the fire, letting his words settle like dust. "I don't think I'd survive a war." "You're surviving one now," he said, voice low. She turned to him, then really looked at him. What kind of man lets a girl stay in his cabin just because it's snowing? "The kind who's got more blankets than sense," he muttered, but there was no bite in it. The next morning she insisted on helping. He showed her how to split kindling, how to sharpen tools, how to gather eggs from the small chicken coop without getting pecked. Her movements were clumsy, but she learned fast. Pain had made her cautious. Fear had made her precise. They didn't talk much, but something started to grow between them, a quiet rhythm. She cooked while he worked. He patched the roof while she mended a tear in his shirt. At night, they ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackle of fire and the occasional bark of the old hound curled by the hearth. By the 5th day she trusted him enough to tell him her name. "Evie," she said softly, over a bowl of venison stew. Sawyer nodded. "Evie." It sounded different in his voice, less like a problem and more like a person. She didn't tell him everything. Not yet. But she told him enough. "My brother sold me," she said one night as snow pressed against the windows. "Said I'd be better off with men who had money. Didn't even say goodbye." Sawyer didn't ask questions. Just nodded once, jaw tightening. "He used to be good," she added, not sure why she felt the need to defend the man who'd betrayed her. "After Ma died, something broke in him. And I picked the wrong boy. Thought he loved me." Sawyer stirred the fire. "We all pick wrong sometimes. He wasn't just wrong. He was cruel. Left me the second he found out." Silence hung between them. Evie felt suddenly exposed, like her skin had been peeled back. "Did you love him?" Sawyer asked. "I wanted to." He nodded as though he understood. "That kind of wanting can make a fool out of anyone." She laughed bitterly. "That's the truth." The wind picked up outside. Somewhere in the woods an animal cried out. Sawyer stood and checked the latch on the door. Evie watched him move, calm, controlled, like a man who'd survived worse storms than this one. The next morning Evie was the first to notice the tracks. She was out gathering kindling when she saw them near the edge of the clearing, hoof prints fresh and deep in the soft snow. She called for Sawyer, who came immediately, rifle in hand. He studied the prints, frowning. 3 horses, he muttered. Heavy riders. Too fresh for hunters. Evie felt her stomach twist. "They followed me. Could be passing through. No. They're looking for something." He glanced at her belly. "Someone." Evie felt her legs go weak. "What do we do?" "We wait." The words chilled her more than the snow. That night she barely slept. Every creak of the wood, every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. Sawyer sat up late by the window, rifle across his lap. He didn't say anything. Didn't promise her safety or offer comfort. But the way he watched the woods, the way he kept that rifle ready, it told her more than words ever could. By morning the tracks were gone, buried beneath new snow. But the fear lingered. Evie moved closer to the fire, wrapping the coat tighter around herself. "You think they'll come back?" she asked. Sawyer didn't look up. "If they're looking for you, they won't stop. Then I should go." He turned his eyes to her, sharp and unwavering. "Where?" "I don't know. Anywhere. You die in a week." She clenched her fists. "Then what am I supposed to do?" He stood, slowly walked to the fire and crouched beside her. "You're not going anywhere. Not yet." Evie blinked, surprised by the fierceness in his tone. "You stay," he said. "You rest. When the melt comes, we'll figure out the next step." She wanted to protest, but something in his voice rooted her. There was no pity in it, only resolve. Later, while Sawyer chopped more wood, she sat by the window and stared out at the quiet forest. The snow had stopped. The world looked untouched. But she knew better. Danger didn't always leave a mark. That night, as she lay on the cot and listened to the fire crackle, she thought about the men on horseback. Her brother. The gamblers. The father of her child. All of them shadows. But here, in this tiny cabin in the wilderness, was one man who didn't try to own her, didn't try to break her, didn't even try to understand her. And somehow that was enough. Sleep came easier than it had in weeks. Outside the wind shifted. Somewhere in the dark woods, a raven called once and went silent. And far off in the distance, 3 riders waited for a signal. The mornings grew brighter as the snow thinned and the first hints of spring crawled over the ridge. Days passed in quiet rhythm, marked by the sound of Sawyer splitting wood, Evie's careful sweeping, the boiling of stew, and the muted hum of survival. The stillness of the wilderness settled into their bones like a second skin. Evie had begun to feel something close to safety, though she never allowed herself the comfort of naming it. Sawyer spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. He taught her how to check snares, how to gut a rabbit clean, how to move through the brush without snapping twigs underfoot. She learned quickly, not out of interest but necessity. Every moment her hands were busy, her mind was quieter. It didn't forget, but it softened. He never asked more questions about her past, and she didn't ask about his. There was a kind of peace in that, 2 people who'd seen too much respecting each other's silence. Yet, unspoken things lingered between them like smoke, curling just out of reach. Trust had grown like moss on stone, slow and careful, needing no declaration. One afternoon, while Sawyer was sharpening his axe and she was stitching a tear in one of his shirts, Evie's breath hitched. A pain bloomed low in her belly and vanished just as fast. She froze, needle midair. "You all right?" Sawyer asked, not looking up. She hesitated. "Yeah. Baby's just moving weird." He gave a slight nod, but his eyes lingered on her a second longer before returning to the blade in his lap. She could tell he was storing the information. He noticed everything, even the things she tried to hide. Later that evening they sat at the table eating rabbit stew. The silence was companionable, broken only by the clink of spoons and the pop of the fire. Sawyer looked at her suddenly, his brow furrowed. "You ever done this before?" Evie blinked. "Had a baby?" "No." He nodded slowly as if confirming something he'd already suspected. "My ma died giving birth to my youngest sister," she said after a beat. "But I remember. Blood. Screaming. My father broke a chair trying to get help from town. By the time he came back, both were gone." Sawyer didn't speak. He just kept his eyes on her, listening like the story mattered. "I'm scared," she said softly. "Not just of the birth. Of after. Of being alone with it." "You're not alone," he said. It wasn't a promise. It was a fact, spoken plainly. That night, as she lay awake listening to the creak of logs and the whistle of wind, she thought about what it might mean to raise a child in the middle of nowhere. No doctor. No midwife. Just her and a man who carried secrets like scars. And still, some strange corner of her heart had begun to believe in this place. In him. The next morning she stepped outside and saw the smoke. A thin column rising from the woods east of the cabin. Too straight, too clean to be from accident. Sawyer appeared beside her before she could call for him. He'd already seen it. "Campfire," he said. "Maybe half a mile." Evie's heart dropped. Could be hunters. Could be worse. He went back inside, came out with his rifle, checked the sights, loaded a fresh round with practiced ease. His movements were steady but tight, like someone who knew danger intimately. Evie felt her chest constrict. "You think it's them?" "Don't know yet." "What if they come here?" He looked her in the eye. "Then we don't open the door." They didn't speak of it again, but the tension hung in the air like the smell of smoke. That night, Sawyer didn't sleep. He sat in the rocker by the window, gun across his lap, watching the tree line. Evie watched him, unable to sleep herself. After an hour, she rose and made tea, the herbs trembling in her hand. "You should rest," she said, handing him the cup. "I don't rest when I'm hunted." She sat beside him, blanket wrapped tight, belly pressing against her knees. "You ever been hunted before?" He didn't answer right away. Then he sipped the tea. "Once." "Why?" His jaw clenched. "Wrong place. Wrong war. Wrong man died." Evie didn't push further. She didn't need to. He wasn't a monster, but he had done something dark, something that followed him like a shadow with a name. The fire dimmed. The wind stilled. In the morning the smoke was gone. But the unease stayed. 2 days passed. Then the visitor came. It was near sundown when the knock hit the door. Sure. Twice. Sawyer was up before Evie could rise. He held a finger to his lips and moved to the window. A man stood outside, tall, lean, with a worn coat and a dust-covered hat pulled low. No horse in sight. No companions either. He carried a satchel and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sawyer opened the door halfway, rifle in clear view. "Can I help you?" he asked. The man tipped his hat. "Evenin'. Name's Carson. Heard there was a cabin up this way. Got turned around huntin'. Wonderin' if I might trouble you for some water." Sawyer didn't move. "Where's your horse?" "Down in the gulch. Spooked and ran off. I'll fetch it after I warm up a bit. Water's down by the creek." The man's smile twitched. "Friendly place you got." Sawyer didn't answer. Evie stepped into view behind him, her presence clear. Carson's eyes flicked to her, then to her belly. The change was subtle, only a moment, but Evie saw it. "Well now," he said more softly. "Didn't know you had company." Sawyer's stance shifted. Not aggressive but firm. "We're full up." "I bet." Carson adjusted his satchel. "Well then. I'll be on my way." "See that you are." The man turned and walked slowly down the path, not looking back. When he was gone, Sawyer closed the door, locked it, and drew the curtain. Evie's hands were trembling. "Who was he?" she asked. "Trouble," Sawyer said. "You think he knew?" "I think he's not a hunter. I think he's scouting. For something." Evie swallowed hard. "Then they're close. Too close." That night, Sawyer cleaned the rifle again. Evie sharpened the kitchen knives. They said little. There was nothing left to say. By morning the air had shifted. The trees stood too still. Even the birds were quiet. Evie gathered water from the creek, every step slow and measured. She looked over her shoulder constantly. The forest didn't feel empty anymore. When she returned to the cabin, she noticed something different. A folded piece of paper on the porch. A red thread tied around it. Sawyer was beside her in seconds. He picked it up, unwrapped the thread, and unfolded the note. 4 words written in careful ink. "We know she's here." Evie felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. Sawyer's voice was low and steady. "Pack what you need. We might have to run." "I can't run far," she said. "I know." He didn't offer comfort. He offered action. They spent the next hour preparing. Sawyer packed food, ammunition, blankets. Evie packed what little she owned, letters she'd never sent, scraps of memory, and a ragged doll she'd sewn for the baby. The fire was doused. The windows checked. The path behind the cabin scouted. Just before dusk, a shot rang out in the woods. Not close. Not far. A message. Evie stood frozen. Her hands pressed to her belly, heart pounding in her ears. Sawyer stepped beside her, rifle slung over his shoulder. "They're trying to scare us. It's working." His voice was gentle for once. "Then let's be smart, not scared." That night they didn't sleep. And for the first time since arriving, Evie whispered a prayer she wasn't sure anyone would hear. But she whispered it anyway. The storm broke just after midnight, but it wasn't rain that came down, it was silence. Heavy and unnatural. The kind of silence that screamed in the bones. Evie lay awake on her cot, one hand curled protectively over her belly, the other gripping the small hunting knife Sawyer had given her. Her breath came slow, measured, as she stared at the flickering shadows cast by the dying fire. The quiet outside pressed against the cabin like a held breath. Sawyer stood near the window, unmoving, a shadow among shadows, his rifle resting across his forearms. The time had come. They both knew it. The note had changed everything. It was no longer a question of if but when. And now the forest, once a sanctuary, had become a trap. Sawyer had sealed the windows, rigged the path with noise-making snares, and blocked the back door with a shelf of firewood. The rifle was cleaned, the hatchet strapped to his hip, the dog kept indoors. Every creak of the wood, every gust of wind was a warning now. Evie shifted, grimacing as another tightening gripped her stomach, sharp and low. Not the first one tonight. Not even the 10th. But she kept her voice quiet. Now was not the time. She looked at Sawyer. He hadn't moved in 20 minutes. "How many?" she whispered. 3. "Maybe 4, he replied without turning. "One's been circling all night. They're patient." Evie swallowed. Her mouth was dry. "Think they'll come before morning?" "I'd bet on it." She hated the calm in his voice, cold and resigned, like a man who'd already decided which way to fall. Another contraction knifed through her. She grit her teeth, stifled the cry. Sawyer glanced back. Just one look, but it lingered. "You're close," he said. Evie nodded, breathing through the pain. Don't worry about me. His eyes narrowed. Not happening. She wanted to argue, to tell him the baby would come whether he was ready or not, but the thud of a branch snapping outside silenced everything. It was close. Deliberate. Sawyer stepped to the door. I'll deal with them, he said, voice low and even. You stay back. If anything happens. No, she snapped. You don't go out there. That's what they want. You step outside, you die first. He didn't argue, which scared her more than anything else. Instead, he moved back from the window and motioned for her to crawl behind the table. He kicked the rug aside, revealing a trapdoor she hadn't known about. Root cellar, he said. Ain't deep. But it's quiet. Evie shook her head. You can't fight alone. Sawyer's mouth twitched, almost a smile. I've done worse. A bang shattered the quiet, metal on wood. The front door. A warning knock. A laugh followed it. High-pitched. Mocking. Evie froze. Her blood turned to ice. Then came the voice, muffled but clear. Come on out, sweetheart. We're here for a talk. Don't make it ugly. She knew that voice. Had heard it back at the camp. One of the men who'd bought her. Her stomach turned. The baby twisted inside her. Sawyer raised the rifle and stepped to the edge of the window. Stay down, he said. Evie crawled behind the table, gripping the knife like it could stop time. The wind outside howled, or maybe that was just fear shrieking in her ears. Another bang. Boone, the voice called. That you in there? Heard about you. Heard you like hiding ghosts. Sawyer didn't answer. A gunshot shattered the top left window. Glass sprayed across the room. The dog barked once, then went silent. Sawyer didn't flinch. A shadow moved across the porch. Another man's voice. You got 5 seconds to hand her over. Then silence again. Evie pressed her hand against her belly, the contraction this time pulling deep and cruel. The baby wasn't waiting anymore. Now, Boone, the first voice yelled. Or we burn you out. Sawyer stepped forward and fired once. A scream cut through the night. Something thudded against the porch. 3 now, Sawyer muttered. Then hell broke loose. Gunfire tore through the front wall. Boards splintered. Sawyer dove to the side, rolling behind the stove. He fired again, 2 shots, then silence. Footsteps pounded around the house. Someone kicked the back door. It held. Evie stayed low, heart racing, knife gripped tight. Her body surged with another wave of pain, so intense she nearly blacked out. When she opened her eyes, Sawyer was at her side. You're bleeding, he said, eyes wild. It's time, she gasped. His jaw clenched. Of course it is. He dragged her to the trapdoor, opened it, and lowered her down. The cellar smelled of earth and roots, but it was dry. He handed her a lantern, then the rifle. Point it up, he said. Don't shoot unless it's him. If it's me, you'll know. Evie nodded, too winded to argue. He looked down at her, eyes searching her face like he wasn't sure he'd see it again. Then he shut the door. Upstairs, footsteps thudded overhead. A body hit the side wall with a sickening crack. More yelling. A fire sparked. She smelled smoke. Evie lay on her back, legs trembling, sweat pouring down her face. She bit into the sleeve of her coat to muffle the scream as her body wrenched again. She couldn't focus. Couldn't think. Just push. Push or die. Then came the noise she feared most. The trapdoor creaked. She raised the rifle. A face appeared, filthy, grinning, blood smeared across one cheek. Not Sawyer. Well now, he whispered, climbing down. Aren't you a stubborn little? The rifle fired. He dropped. Evie screamed from the recoil and the pain. Her vision blurred. The air reeked of blood and gunpowder. Moments later, another figure came down. Big, fast, rifle in hand. Sawyer. He looked at the body, then at her, then at the spreading pool beneath her. Evie, he said, dropping beside her. Stay with me. I can't, she gasped. It's coming. It's now. Sawyer set the rifle aside and ripped off his coat. All right, he said, voice shaking. We do this now. She didn't remember much of what came next. Just fire and blood and Sawyer's voice in her ear, telling her to breathe, to hold on, to fight. Hours passed like seconds and centuries. The pain was so sharp it went beyond meaning. And then silence. A cry. High, piercing, alive. Sawyer wrapped the child in his coat, his hands shaking. It's a girl, he whispered. Evie sobbed once, then collapsed against the dirt wall. When she woke, light filtered through the trapdoor. Sawyer sat beside her, cradling the baby, eyes red from exhaustion and smoke. They're gone, he said quietly. All of them. I buried them by the river. She didn't ask what that meant. She didn't need to. She's strong, he added, looking down at the tiny, squirming bundle. Just like her mother. Evie blinked back tears. You stayed. He met her gaze. Told you I would. For a long time, they sat in the quiet earth beneath the cabin, the scent of ash and blood still clinging to the air. The baby whimpered and Sawyer held her close. When they finally climbed out, the house was blackened but standing. Smoke curled from the rafters. The dog limped but wagged its tail. Outside the snow was gone. Spring had arrived. Evie stepped onto the porch, her daughter in her arms. The sun warmed her face. She looked at the trees, the river beyond them, the grave markers hidden in the brush. Then she looked at Sawyer. I think we'll be all right, she said. He nodded. We already are.